Ladies and gentlemen, Eddie Marcus here once again, and I'm still hanging around in that wonderful city that's been stripped of much of its pride, Itabena, my hometown. I want to take this moment, ladies and gentlemen, and refer to you to some of those scriptures that I've heard you say oftentimes, that humans basically were nothing but filthy, dirty rags, especially when compared to the wonderfulness of the Almighty. And the reality of it, ladies and gentlemen, is that at this current day has nothing to do with back in those days when they were talking about a scripture, but talking about it this time, in these days. And when we refer to us as being nothing but filthy rags, it's talking about all of us. There's not a human being on the face of this earth that I can see today that is anything more than filthy rags. And why do I say that? I say that, ladies and gentlemen, because as people, we have not learned the essentials for survival, which are, beginning with number one, and that is to care for one another. We have recognized over and over and over again that there are so many wonderful, wonderful people in this country. You got them on the front line, whether it has to do with health care, whether it has to do with violence, whether it has to do with security, whatever it has to do with, there are wonderful people all on the front line. And the message that has been made clear today is that regardless of the front line and all of the good people in the world, and there are many, I'd like to just emphasize that again, the reality of it is that at the end of the day, they fall short of what is proper and sufficient to be recognized as something that is alive and led by a spirit of love. So, ladies and gentlemen, I like to often share with those of you who are paying attention to what is being done, not just here in America, but has been done all over the world. Not too long ago, there was a young man, I think it was May 25th, 2020, a young man who was selected and chosen by God to be lifted up, to be glorified, to be used in a message that God would send to the whole world. And I say God, ladies and gentlemen, because it was something that we could not do. It is something that, as we know, basically happened in a narrative progression. It had to do with the power in the United States of America, a power that reigns supreme over all, and that power is white power. White power by the force of guns. That's why we have such a problem with guns. That white power enforced by guns, and there's no one more willing to kill you than people with guns. Racists, bigots, nationalists, haters with guns, and they're really ready to kill you. And the maximum of those guns are in the communities of those people who have no color as far as we are concerned. And so, ladies and gentlemen, when we have that, this is representative according to that demonstration in May 25th in Minneapolis, Minnesota, was with George Floyd, a young man who was accosted by the police and eventually had his body laid flat on the ground with the power structure and all of the power of the United States in that knee on that brother's neck. And it didn't matter how many cameras were there. It didn't matter how many people were there saying you're killing him. It didn't matter how many people were there reminding this cop of what was being done to this brother and what this brother was saying, how he was being suffered. It didn't matter. The powers that be said, you got oxygen, you're talking. And so in the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, George Floyd was murdered right there. And we have that indication that what was happening right here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, representing the United States of America, is the same thing that was happening all over the globe. So wherever there are people suffering, there are people suffering everywhere. That's where we have a lack of love. Now, when we look at this, ladies and gentlemen, if you stand back and just take a peek at it, stand back and take a peek at it. People over 400 years, because of their shade, robbed, abused, exploited, treated second-class citizens. 3/5 of a human being. Isn't that just absolutely evil? Well, that's the world that we live in, ladies and gentlemen. That is the absolute world we live in. And I want to say to you that the message that we were given is that when George Floyd was being murdered by the white structure that represented the power, his cries and pleas represented the pain and suffering of the abused in this land and in every land. And these abuses exist because of the systems in which we live under. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what is so essential here that you get a chance to understand is that it didn't matter how much you cried, how much you pleaded for your relief, for somebody to care. It just didn't happen. And so at the end, not only George Floyd died, but we as people of the world suffer as a result every day. And this happens continuously because none of us are anything more than filthy rags. And yes, I'd like to reemphasize there are many good people around. But you know the old adage says that the only thing necessary for evil to prevail is for good people to do nothing. And this is exactly what happened when George Floyd was being murdered. Good people did nothing but what they always do, talk. Good people do nothing but what they always do, talk. And this is what allowed Mr. Floyd to be glorified in such a way that all over the world people recognized it and said, oh, it's happening over here too. It's happening over here as well. It's happening over here too. It's happening over here. It's happening over here. Everybody was standing up saying, it's happening. It's happening to all of us. And I saw this as a moment of judgment. What are we, the people who are victims by this? What are we, the people who persecute one another in ways such as this? What are we as victims going to do about this? Now, those people who were sitting there with the camera, who did they represent? They represented all of us. They represented the people who are lawyers, big shots. They represented people who were doctors. They represented people who were CEOs in executive positions. They represented people in every walk of life, judges. It represented health professionals. It represented everybody, ladies and gentlemen, everybody. And so when we think about this persecution and the sufferings that continuously going on over and over and over and over again, none of us are excused. We are all victimized, whether we are playing a part in the process or just receiving the persecution that comes upon us. It is all us. Now, why does this continue? We got something that's missing in this process. We spend a lot of time talking about God. We spend a lot of time in churches talking about God. And yet those people who sit in those pews were represented out there talking about, get up off of George Floyd, talking. Those people who sit up in those pulpits talking about God, they were represented as, get up off George Floyd, you're killing him. But the reality is there was no God there. Now, what do I mean when I say that there was no God there? Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have a system that's set up in America, and I'm sure the same similar types of systems that are set up all over the world. And in America, we have a political system. We talk about politics to make the difference that's going to address the concerns of the people. That's what they have chosen to spend their money on, politics. And those politics are reduced to a couple of political parties with power. One might be the Republican Party, another might be the Democratic Party. And who is in these parties? Everybody in America. You got those people I just got through mentioning, those people who call themselves importers. You got those pews people, you got those preachers and everybody in the Republican Party. You got those same representations from those groups in the Democratic Party. And it is those two parties that have been able to construct and lead and direct this American society for the many years that we know of personally in our own lives. And it is those parties that continue to exist, that continue this abuse of human population. And the reason that it is able to do it, again, we got a lot of love out there. We got a lot of good people out there. But the problem, ladies and gentlemen, is that we do not have righteousness. It is the lack of righteousness that allows these things to continue. You see, everything else that exists, as far as we know it in America, we can find an excuse for it. we will find an excuse for it. We spoke up, but it wasn't good enough. The system is so bad. And all of the excuses we can find allows these things to exist. But there's one excuse we don't share, and that when it comes down to righteousness. You see, everything else might fall according to some order or some other law that allows a perpetuation of these crimes and violences. But righteousness will not allow that to happen. You see, righteousness is moved and motivated by a different principle. And it is called, what do you think that righteousness is guided and directed by? Morality. Any righteous person knows that wherever they are confronted with pain and suffering and hurting of other people that is caused by something that should not allow it to happen, it should not happen. And righteous people will take an act to stop it. They will stop it. The only righteousness that could have happened at George Floyd's murder is if somebody, somehow, had saved his life. That would have been the right thing to do. That would have been righteousness coming to the aid of an unrighteous act. That would have been God. But there is a lack of God. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I don't mean to suggest that there are no righteous people on the earth. But for those that I am familiar with, like Martin Luther King, he's not here anymore. Why? Because he was righteous. People like Mahatma Gandhi, he's not here anymore. Why? Because he was righteous. Guys like Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson, Andrew Young, and all those kind of guys, those were good men. Good men, and they are good men today. And as their goodness, all of this pain and suffering continues because there are no righteous people around here. And so when I say there are no righteous people around here, that does not give any of us permission to go around and say that we are somebody other than the cause of the problems. And only when we accept this reality will we respond in a different kind of way. So, ladies and gentlemen, I really just took a moment here. I'm going to do some more of these presentations. But right now, I just had to say something. And as hot as it is here in Mississippi, man, I'm going to close this. But I just wanted to leave that with you. Here it is today. The reason that the problems continue to exist here in America because righteousness is dead. Nobody is responding to the moral principles of life. Everything exists. Morally, there would be no hunger because a person who was righteous, where hunger is wrong, and they wouldn't accept it. There would be no homeless people, not under righteousness, because righteousness knows that the resources available for everybody to have housing has already been provided, and the moral thing to do would be to make sure that there are none that are homeless. But without that, we got homelessness everywhere. We got people living in houses who can't afford them. You got, why? Why can't you afford your house? Because of this immorality that exists in this world today. You got political leaders who are as unrighteous as they can be. You got your church preachers, deacons, missionaries as unrighteous as they can be. Every last one of them. Look, I know you do not like what I'm saying, but I'm going to tell you anyway. And you can prove me wrong, not by spouting at me, not by getting on the phone saying something about God and saying something about Jesus forgiving all of your stupidity. You can do all that you want to do, but you are unfit to call yourself a child of God the way you're acting. And I'm going to tell you, that's the way I feel about it. And it's not my opinion. I'm going to tell you you're unfit. I know you're unfit. Why? Because the pain and suffering that others feel, I feel it the same. And not only that, in over the past 40 years, I've contacted you. I've gone amongst the community people. I've gone into the churches. I've gone into the organization. And I've lifted up the moral rights of people. And I have not received any support from anybody except, in 40 years, except one person just the other day heard me make a presentation and just came to me and said, I didn't see it before, but now it's clear as day. And that's just one person in 40 years. It took a long time to get that one person, but finally that one person. And ladies and gentlemen, whatever you think, whatever you want to say, whatever you want to call an opinion, it's right here in America. We're on our road to hell. And you can let somebody trick you and think that you can wait till the last moment when you're about to take your last breath and ask God to forgive you, and you're going to be forgiven. You can let somebody trick you, or you can just believe it's going to happen. That's your choice. But why take a choice like that when you can do it today? If you belong in heaven, why wait? If you belong in righteousness, why wait? Why not do the things today that makes heaven heaven? Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I heard somebody say that. I even heard somebody say that came out of the book. I even heard somebody say Jesus said that. But where is it? It's no place to be found. So ladies and gentlemen, having said that, this is Eddie Marcus saying thank you for listening and goodbye.